What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and in this edition of the Overthinking MTG podcast, I want to talk about a card from Wilds of Eldraine that I think has the potential to really open up another archetype that's been like fringe playable, like kind of tier 2 or 3, however you phrase it, but definitely not a meta deck, and that is lands. So right now in Standard, we have a lot of different pieces that can work with the lands, either coming in and out of your graveyard, or just simply being, having a lot of them on the field. And Wilds of Eldraine brings us Blossoming Tortoise, which could potentially make that deck significantly more powerful. So Blossoming Tortoise is a 3/3 for 2 green creature type turtle. Whenever Blossoming Tortoise enters the battlefield or attacks, mill 3 cards, then return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Activated abilities of lands you control cost 1 less to activate, and land creatures you control get +1/+1. So this card has a ton of stuff going on if you can leverage lands. So the idea that, okay, it buffs your land creatures, so that's obviously, okay, we want land creatures in one way or another. And then also activated abilities costing less. The obvious synergy here is with the creature lands. So obviously we have, in Wilds of Eldraine, there's a whole sequence of creature lands coming, such as the Restless Vinestalk, which gives us the ability to spend a certain amount of mana, activate it, turn it into a creature, and swing. So Blossoming Tortoise makes the activation cost less, and it makes the creature larger. So it does, pretty much everything we're looking for. So those in the mana base of any kind of deck with Blossoming Tortoise is probably a good idea. Additionally, when Blossoming Tortoise enters, there's a pretty decent chance you're going to mill one, assuming you have a lot in your deck, and get one onto the field. So it gets it onto the field, it makes it easier to activate, and it makes it bigger once you do. What's not to love? It works perfectly. So we have all of those. We also have Mishra's Foundry in Standard right now as well, which only costs 2 colorless to activate. With 1 Blossoming Tortoise down, it only costs 1. If you get 2 Blossoming Tortoises, all of a sudden the activation on Mishra's Foundry is 0. And so you can animate it into a 2/2 creature just at will. And that's really freaking cool, I think. So at the end of the day, Blossoming Tortoise synergizes really, really well with creature lands, but we can do more. There are a lot of other cards in Standard that care about lands in one way or another. And one that would have been rotating had, the normal kind of rotation, or the previous rotation schedule stuck around, is Slogurk the Overslime. This is a card that I think is highly underrated. Slogurk is a 3/3 for 3 with trample. And whenever a land card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, you put a +1/+1 counter on Slogurk. And then you have the ability to remove 3 +1/+1 counters from Slogurk, bounce it back to your hand, and when Slogurk leaves the battlefield, you return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. So you're effectively drawing 3 cards out of your graveyard every time Slogurk leaves, but they're only lands. Well, if you have a lot of utility lands, if you have a lot of creature lands, if you have lands that can cycle or activate, such as the channel lands, such as Boseiju Who Endures, Otawara the Soaring City. If you add those into the mix, all of a sudden, you can be effectively grabbing cards that function like spells from your graveyard back into your hand. So I've been actually using Slogurk in a deck right now that has 3 of each. It's a Sultai deck. It has 3 of each of the channel lands in its respective colors, but as a result, it has to run 30 lands to make sure we have enough lands. Well, Blossoming Tortoise is like a no-brainer slam dunk in those decks. So it just does all the things we want. If Blossoming Tortoise enters after Slogurk, we mill 3 cards. For every land that is milled this way, Slogurk gets a +1/+1 counter, and we get to put one of them onto the battlefield immediately because of the Tortoise. But then obviously if Slogurk leaves the battlefield for any reason, we can then grab the other ones, bring them back to our hand. And if those are like I said, the channel lands or the cycling lands in the case of the Triomes, we're doing something here. We got a stew going. It works especially well with Takenuma, the Abandoned Mire, the black one, because you're able to use Takenuma, like if Slogurk dies, say in combat, because it's going to be a large creature on the battlefield if you're able to get the mill plan going. If Slogurk dies in combat and goes to your graveyard, you can Takenuma and bring Slogurk back, then play out Slogurk again, and then when Slogurk dies, it can bring the Takenuma back to your hand. Obviously, that's a mana-intensive loop. It's not necessarily one you want to be setting up, but it does make it so that it's almost impossible to get rid of Slogurk unless it gets exiled. So it makes for a really tenacious threat that your opponent is going to have a really tough time dealing with. So that's just delightful in my opinion. So again, that's the kind of shell that Blossoming Tortoise can make work, and I think that's really darn cool. There are a couple of other details that I want to point out though. Because this makes all activated abilities of lands cost less. That includes land creatures. And there are a number of different ways that we can abuse this. And one is actually an infinite combo. There's actually a legitimate infinite combo that will be legal in Standard with Blossoming Tortoise. And it involves a card that a lot of people are not using right now, and that is Draconic Destiny. Draconic Destiny is an aura for 1 red. It's an enchant creature. The enchanted creature gets +1/+1, has flying, haste, and pay 1 generic. This creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It's a dragon addition to its other types. And then when the enchanted creature dies, you return Draconic Destiny to your hand. So the way that this works is you have some kind of animated land. Once you have an animated creature, if you put Draconic Destiny on it while the Blossoming Tortoise is on the field, that activated ability to pay 1 generic and give it a power boost all of a sudden costs 0 to activate. So you have a flying creature with infinite power because it can just freely pump itself. This is really darn cool. So obviously this can work with the animate lands like the Restless Vinestock or like Mishra's Foundry. We can do some really good work with those. And Mishra's Foundry definitely is cheap enough that we can definitely make that work, no problem. But there's another card that's legal in Standard right now that can also leverage or that can take advantage of this sequence, and that is Awaken the Woods. So Awaken the Woods is X green, create X 1/1 green forest Dryad creature tokens. Now, it's easy to feel like these are just 1/1 like Llanowar elves, but in fact, they are lands. The tokens that this generates are 1/1 lands. And so if you have a Blossoming Tortoise down, hitting Awaken the Woods, you're already creating 2/2s all around. And then these are creatures that are perpetually creatures and lands simultaneously. So on your turn, you don't have to invest any mana to animate them, to turn them into creatures. So it's much easier to play out Draconic Destiny on top of them because your mana is freely available. You have all the mana in the world, so just pay 3 of it, drop 1 on your Dryad, and all of a sudden, if your opponent doesn't have any flying blockers, they're dead on the spot. And if they do have flying blockers, you have more, you know, in that situation, because you didn't have to invest mana to animate these things, you have mana available to use things like Otawara, Soaring City, to bounce their potential blockers and get in for the kill. So honestly, I think Blossoming Tortoise has an opportunity to create some really cool archetypes if curving out with creatures is possible in Standard. And admittedly, it's right now, that's really hard to make work. You know, the idea of sticking a 4-drop 3/3 and expecting it to live in a format where you have Nahiri's War forming, Go for the Throat, you know, obviously Go for the Throat ossification. You even have things like Wandering Emperor if you try to attack with it. So Sunfall, there is so much out there that answers creatures right now. Trying to stick a creature and have it survive and get value is really, really difficult. But to Blossoming Tortoise's credit, at the very least, it's putting 3 cards into your graveyard, and it's also getting you a land onto the battlefield tapped. So at the very least, it's ramping you. So, you know, and if it pulls a removal, it pulls removal. Obviously, other ramp packages like Topiary Stomper work really, really well alongside Blossoming Tortoise because it is also ramping you with lands. Wrenn and Realmbreaker is also a fantastic add in the Blossoming Tortoise deck because it can also mill you and pull permanents from your graveyard to your hand, such as other Blossoming Tortoises or Slogurks, or the Draconic Destiny for that matter, and it can animate a land. So there's a lot of synergy and a lot of stuff that's animating lands in Standard right now, and it doesn't really have a home. I think Blossoming Tortoise might be the edge that those decks need. So I'm going to have a lot of fun brewing with it. If you want to check that out, I'm going to be streaming over on Twitch, twitch.tv/hamhacks42. I'm there Monday through Friday, starting at around 7:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So hopefully we'll see you out there after Wilds of Eldraine is released on that client. And also, I just want to say a huge thank you, well, for you for making it to the end of the video. Appreciate that. But also to my patrons and channel members. You help me keep the lights on, and I wouldn't be able to do this without you. So, thank you. All right, everybody. I'll catch you on the next one.